Okay, Norbert, we're going to do story time. When kindness returns. Long ago, the forest built gates, and beside them stood watchers. At first, the gates were welcoming. Creatures from other forests crossed them openly, bringing stories, seeds, and songs. Difference was noticed, but it was not feared. The borders marked where paths entered the forest, not who was allowed to belong. Over time, the watchers changed. They began to speak of danger more often than care. They told stories that made creatures uneasy with one another. Protection slowly shifted into control, wrapped in words that sounded responsible and necessary. The watchers began to name certain creatures as dangerous, not because of what they did, but because of how they were perceived. Difference was turned into suspicion. Those who didn't conform were treated as a threat, regardless of how they looked. The borders hardened, not to protect the forest, but to sort it out, to decide who belonged easily and who would always be questioned. What changed most was where the borders lived. They moved deeper into the forest. They appeared along the paths that had once been free. They slowed movement and blocked trails. Faces were hidden. Weapons appeared. Creatures were taken without cause, breaking rules the forest had lived by for generations. Bit by bit, a tower rose. It was built from warnings and suspicion, from the idea that keeping the forest safe required obedience. From its height, the watchers could see farther than any creature on the ground. They pointed and named threats. Animals began to look at one another differently. Neighbors felt watched. Duty to protect the tower and the forest settled over the woods like a heavy covering, warm at first and then hard to breathe beneath. Norbert felt it before he understood it. The ground no longer softened under his paws the way it used to. The forest was still there, but something in it was holding its breath. The watchers no longer needed to tend the gates. The tower watched for them, and the gates followed its lead. Lyra, she hovered close, her glow unsteady. When protection forgets truth, she said quietly, it starts asking for things it was never meant to take. Voices rose across the forest. Some repeated what they had been told. Some argued with one another. Others stayed silent, sensing the wrongness but unsure how to name it. The gates were no longer about entry. They were about control. Creatures were stopped for moving, for breathing, for not knowing the right words to say. Home became something that had to be proven. The forest didn't answer with noise. The trees carried what needed to be known through the ground. It passed where voices could not. Norbert didn't confront the watchers. He stayed near the paths where creatures were most often stopped. He stayed where he could be seen. After a time, others joined him. A deer stood a little back, still enough to notice everything. A badger settled near the roots, solid and unmoving. Birds gathered in the branches above, not calling out, just watching. Even the mice paused at the edges, their small bodies present where fear expected silence. No one spoke. No one advanced. No one turned away. When fear pressed forward, none of them moved aside. When force waited for a reaction, none was given. They stayed. Fear didn't disappear. It simply stopped being fed. Because they witnessed together, the truth couldn't be unseen. Norbert didn't leave his place. That steadiness helped others find theirs. And because they all stayed, small things began to shift. Creatures stopped repeating what they were told to fear. They stopped reporting one another. They learned where to stand without being seen and when to move together instead of alone. The tower didn't fall suddenly. It stayed where it was, watching, recording, waiting. Life didn't wait for the gates. The creatures began to share kind words, not as a performance, not to prove anything. Kindness was simply where life returned first. They gathered and cooked and danced. They sang, they told stories, they made things with their hands because they could. And no one had taken that from them yet. The art moved through the forest in quiet ways. A song carried farther than a warning. A carving left at a crossroads said more than a command ever had. Colors appeared where fear had thinned. The tower could watch, but it couldn't stop this. Love and peace moved without permission, passing from clearing to clearing, root to root, carried by those who chose to stay true to their hearts. And the forest remembered itself. You are a good, good heart, and Norbert is a good, good boy.